My mother was a queen, and the council had spent 6 years pretending my father did not exist. I knew this the way children know things, without anyone saying it plainly. I knew it in the way the regents looked past him at the long table, the way they addressed my mother as Your Grace and company, instead of using his name, the way the official portraits in the East Hall stopped 1 generation short of him, as if the painters had simply run out of canvas. My mother was Athera Vesk-Murren, last crowned head of House Vesk, exiled for 4 years to the Weather Coast before the council allowed her home, and in all that exile she had married a human relay engineer named Holt Ferris and had me. The council called the marriage an irregularity. They called him, when they called him anything, the technician. He never corrected them. That was the first thing I understood about my father. He didn't need the room to agree with him before he'd do the next right thing in it. We lived, that year, at Calder Station, a squat gray relay post on the lip of the strait where my mother still served out the last months of a sentence nobody in court liked to name aloud. The regents visited twice a season, found nothing to fault, and left looking faintly disappointed. The rest of the time it was just us, my mother mending the wind logs by lamplight, my father out on the gantry with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and me, 6 years old, certain the whole arrangement was the most natural thing in the world, because I had never known another one. The storm came up out of the strait on a night the wardens hadn't predicted, a black front that ate the horizon in under an hour. I remember the alarm bell more than I remember being afraid, a flat iron clang that didn't stop, and my mother's hand closing hard around mine, and the storm wardens, 3 of them, council men in good coats, already gone from the relay platform before the first wave hit the seawall. They had families upriver. Nobody blamed them for running. I only remember that my father did not run with them. "Get her below," he told my mother, meaning me, and she did, and then, because she was still a queen even 6 years exiled, even married to a man the court wouldn't name, she went back up to help him anyway. I watched the rest of it through the relay window, my face pressed to glass gone cold as river ice. The water main fed 12 coastal houses below the station, families with no standing at all, fishers and net menders who'd never once been written into a council record. When the storm cut the main relay, those houses would lose their water seals in the surge, and the floodline would take them whole. My father climbed the gantry in the dark and the wet and the wind that took men twice his size off their feet, and he held the manual valve open by hand because the automatic feed had failed, and he did not let go of it for 6 hours. I didn't understand at 6 what that meant in any technical sense. I understood it the way a child understands anything important, as a picture that doesn't leave you. My father's silhouette against the relay lights, soaked through, both hands locked white-knuckled on a wheel of iron, while below him the black water came up the seawall stair by stair and didn't take the houses. I understood that my mother stood beside him with a lamp held high so he could see the gauge, not speaking, not asking him to stop, because she already knew he wouldn't. Somewhere in the worst of it, he went down into the flooding stair himself and came back up twice, each time with a child from the lower houses slung over one shoulder, soaked and shaking and alive, and each time he went straight back to the valve without a word to anyone, as if carrying a stranger's child out of a flood were simply the next item on a list he intended to finish before morning. By dawn the storm had gone out the way it came, fast and indifferent, and the 12 houses still stood, and my father's hands were torn raw at the palm from the valve wheel, and he never once, that whole gray morning, told anyone what he'd done. He wrapped his hands himself badly and went to check the relay gauges because the gauges still needed checking. The regents came back at the end of the season, as scheduled, to close out my mother's exile and decide, formally, with the particular cruelty of men who enjoy formality, whether the irregularity of her marriage would be struck from the succession record or merely buried in it. I sat where children were meant to sit at council, against the wall, meant to be silent, meant to be decorative. They did not ask me anything. They were not in the habit of asking children anything. The senior regent, a narrow man named Corvash Dell, was midway through a sentence about the unfortunate precedent of allowing sentiment to outweigh lineage, when I said, in the plain, unrehearsed voice of someone who has never learned that rooms like this one expect to be managed, "He stayed when the sky went black." The council did not look at me the way they looked at my mother. Nobody had taught them yet how to discount a child's testimony with practiced grace, and so, for one unguarded moment, the whole long table simply turned, startled, and looked. "He stayed when the sky went black," I said again, because it was the truest thing I knew, and I did not yet understand that truth was supposed to be complicated. The wardens left. He didn't. He held the water valve all night so the houses by the seawall wouldn't flood and his hands bled, and he went down twice into the water for other people's children, and he never told anybody. I'm telling you because he won't. I remember the silence after that more clearly than almost anything else in my life. It was not the silence of a room deciding what to say next. It was the silence of a room that had, for 6 years, built an entire careful argument around a man it had never once actually looked at, and had just been handed, by a child too young to know she wasn't supposed to, the one piece of plain fact that argument couldn't survive. Corvash Dell, to his credit, was the first to speak, and what he said was not what I expected. He asked quietly which 12 houses. My mother answered him. Her voice didn't shake. She had been waiting 6 years for someone in that room to ask a real question, and now that one had, she gave him the names, the net menders, the Fisher families, the lower houses that had no standing at court and never would, every name said clear and unhurried, the way you say something you have kept polished in your mind for a long time because no one would let you say it out loud. When she finished, nobody at the table spoke for a long moment. Then Dell looked down the room toward the door where my father stood, hands still wrapped, having come in late, and said nothing, the way he said nothing about most things that mattered. "Technician," Dell said, and stopped and seemed to hear for the first time in 6 years how small the word actually was. He tried again. "Lord Ferris." It came out awkward, unpracticed, a name the room had simply never had cause to use correctly before, but he used it. My father didn't move from the doorway. He had never once needed the room's permission to be who he already was. But my mother crossed to him anyway in front of the whole council, and took his ruined hands in both of hers, careful of the bandages, and didn't let go. And nobody in that room, not Dell, not the regents, not the recorders with their careful pens, said one word about irregularity again. They struck nothing from the succession record that day. They added to it. My father's name went in plain, beside my mother's, in the same hand, the same ink, the same column reserved for rulers. Not because a council had finally decided to be generous, but because a child had told them, without artifice, exactly what she had seen, and there had turned out to be no argument in the world strong enough to survive being placed next to the truth. I was 6. I did not understand thrones or successions or the long, careful cruelty of men like Dell. I understood a wheel of iron and a man's bleeding hands and a lamp held steady in the dark by a queen who had never once doubted him. That was the whole of what I knew, and it turned out in the end to be enough.